Nobody heard her speak, but everybody heard the shot. It cracked across the valley sharp and clean, cutting through the chaos like it didn't belong to the same moment. 1 second, Bravo squad was scattered behind cover, yelling over each other, trying to figure out where the incoming fire was coming from, and the next second everything just stopped. Not because the danger was gone, but because something about that single shot felt different. Controlled, certain, final. Jackson slowly lifted his head, just enough to peek over the broken concrete slab he was hiding behind, his heart still racing from the pressure of being pinned down. The ridge ahead looked the same as before, rocks, shadows, uneven terrain, but one detail had changed. A figure that had been barely visible seconds ago was now collapsing, sliding out of position and disappearing behind the edge. Jackson blinked, trying to process it, his mind not catching up with what his eyes were telling him. Nobody on his team had taken that shot. He knew that. He would have heard it, seen it, felt the movement. But the shot was real and the target was down. Behind him, Morales let out a low breath, almost like he'd been holding it the entire time. "Yo, you saw that, right?" he muttered, his voice quieter now, like speaking too loud might break whatever just happened. Another soldier shook his head slowly. "That wasn't one of us," he said, almost in disbelief. "No way." Jackson didn't answer right away. His eyes had already shifted, scanning his own team now instead of the ridge. One by one, he looked at each of them, checking their positions, their weapons, their reactions. Everyone looked just as confused as he felt. Everyone except one. Riley Carter was still crouched behind her cover, exactly where she had been seconds before, but something about her had changed. Or maybe it hadn't changed at all, and this was the first time anyone was actually seeing it. Her posture was steady, her breathing controlled, her rifle held with a kind of familiarity that didn't look like practice. It looked like instinct. She wasn't looking at her teammates. She wasn't waiting for someone to say something. Her focus was still locked downrange, her eyes scanning like the situation wasn't over yet. Jackson frowned slightly, a thought forming in his mind that didn't quite make sense at first. "Carter," he said, the name coming out slower than he intended. She didn't respond. Didn't even glance at him, just a slight adjustment of her grip, a subtle shift of her position like she was already preparing for something else. And that's when it clicked. The shot, the timing. The precision. It lined up too perfectly to ignore. Jackson felt a strange tension settle in his chest, like he was realizing something he should have seen earlier but didn't. "No way," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Morales leaned closer, following his gaze. "What?" he asked, but then he saw her too, saw the stillness, the focus. The complete lack of panic. "Hold up," he whispered. The comms suddenly crackled, breaking the moment. "Bravo squad, status update," Sergeant Cole's voice came through, sharp and demanding as always. Jackson grabbed the radio almost automatically, but his eyes didn't leave Riley. "We had enemy sniper contact," he said, his voice steadier now, though his thoughts were still catching up. "Had," Cole responded immediately. "Clarify." Jackson hesitated for just a fraction of a second because saying it out loud made it real. It meant admitting that everything they thought about one person on their team had been wrong. He exhaled slowly. "Sniper, S down." There was a pause on the other end, longer than usual. "Who took the shot?" Cole asked, his tone shifting slightly, more focused now. Jackson's grip tightened on the radio as he finally looked away from Riley and down at the device in his hand. For a moment he considered saying something else, something easier, something that wouldn't raise questions. But that moment passed quickly. His eyes moved back to Riley, still calm, still focused, still acting like none of this mattered. "Carter did," he said. Silence followed, not just on the comms, but in the air around them. The kind of silence that spreads when something unexpected changes the way people see things. Behind him, someone shifted uncomfortably. Another soldier let out a quiet breath. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody made a comment, because deep down they all knew what they had just witnessed, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. Jackson lowered the radio slowly, his attention returning fully to Riley. For the first time since the mission started, he wasn't annoyed by her silence. He wasn't questioning why she was there. Instead, he was trying to figure out how he had missed something so obvious. Riley exhaled softly, her voice finally breaking through again, calm and level like she wasn't standing in the middle of a high-pressure situation. "Two more," she said. Jackson blinked. "What?" he asked, turning toward her completely now. She adjusted her angle slightly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned a different section of the terrain. "Two more shooters," she repeated quietly. "Rotating positions, one left, one deeper." The words landed heavy. Morales frowned, trying to process it. "How can you even tell that?" he asked, but his voice didn't carry the same dismissive tone it would have had earlier. This time it sounded more like genuine confusion. Riley didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Her focus said enough. The way she moved, the way she observed, the way she spoke only when necessary, it all pointed to something they hadn't recognized before. Something they had underestimated. Jackson felt a shift in his mindset, subtle but undeniable. The situation hadn't changed. The threat was still there. But now, for the first time since the simulation started, he didn't feel completely blind. He looked at Riley again, really looked this time, and realized that the quiet girl they had all ignored wasn't just part of the team. She was the one person who actually understood what was happening out there. And whether they liked it or not, everything from this point forward was going to depend on her. The air didn't feel the same anymore. Just minutes ago, it had been filled with panic, scattered thoughts, and half-broken commands, but now there was a strange kind of focus settling in. Like the chaos had been forced into a shape nobody expected. Jackson could feel it in his chest, that shift from reacting blindly to actually thinking, and it all traced back to one thing: Riley Carter. He glanced at her again, still not fully wrapping his head around it, but there was no denying it now. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't lucky. She was reading the field like it was second nature, like she'd been here 100 times before while the rest of them were still trying to figure out the rules. "All right," Jackson said finally, his voice lower, more controlled than before. "Talk to me." It wasn't an order this time, it was something else. Something closer to trust, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. Riley didn't look at him. She kept her eyes forward, scanning the ridge and the tree line beyond it, her breathing steady, almost slow compared to everyone else. "Left shooter's impatient," she said quietly. "He's adjusting too fast between shots, gives away his position." Jackson followed her line of sight, squinting, but all he saw was the same uneven terrain and shadows blending together. To him, it still looked like nothing. "And the other?" he asked. "Disciplined," Riley replied. "He's the problem." There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty. Just a calm breakdown of a situation that seconds ago had all of them frozen. Morales shifted beside Jackson, clearly trying to see what she was seeing. "So what's the move?" he asked. That question hung in the air for a moment because nobody missed what it meant. They were asking her now, not joking, not doubting, actually asking. Riley adjusted her position slightly, bringing the rifle closer into her shoulder. "We bait the impatient one," she said. "He'll take the shot." Jackson frowned. "And then," Riley's finger rested just outside the trigger, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Then I take him." Simple, clean, like she was explaining something obvious. Jackson let out a slow breath, weighing it in his mind. It was risky, but staying pinned down was worse. "Do it," he said finally, turning to Morales. "You're up." "Shift right, make it obvious." Morales blinked. "You serious?" Jackson nodded. "We don't have better options." There was a brief pause, then Morales exhaled and adjusted his gear. "All right, let's see what Ghost Girl's got," he muttered, but there was no mockery in it this time, just tension. Morales moved, breaking cover just enough to draw attention. The second he did, the valley seemed to hold its breath. A split second later, pop. The shot rang out exactly like Riley predicted. Morales dropped instantly behind another piece of cover. "Contact left," he shouted, even though they all already knew. But this time, before the echo of that shot even faded, Riley had already locked in. Her rifle steadied, her body completely still, her focus razor sharp. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just a controlled inhale, and then the trigger moved. Crack. Another shot, just as precise as the first one she'd taken earlier. Jackson's eyes snapped toward the ridge again, and this time he caught it, the faint movement of a figure jerking back and disappearing. "That's two," he said under his breath, almost in disbelief. Nobody cheered, nobody spoke right away, because now it wasn't shocking anymore, it was something else, something heavier, something real. Riley didn't lower her rifle. If anything, her focus sharpened even more. "Last one's already relocating," she said. "He heard that." Jackson clenched his jaw slightly. "Where?" Riley shifted her aim slightly toward the deeper tree line. He's smarter. He won't repeat positions. Morales crawled back beside them, breathing a little heavier now. So what, we just wait for him to pick us off? He asked. Riley shook her head slightly. No, he's watching us, waiting for a mistake. Jackson nodded slowly, starting to see the pattern now. So we don't give him one? Riley didn't respond, but the slight tilt of her head suggested she agreed. Seconds stretched longer now, each one carrying weight. The third sniper didn't fire. Didn't reveal himself. The tension built in a different way this time, not chaos but anticipation. Jackson could feel sweat forming under his gear despite the cold air. This was different. This wasn't reacting anymore. This was a game of patience, and Riley seemed completely comfortable in it. Her eyes moved slowly, methodically, scanning every possible angle. He's watching for leadership, she said suddenly. Jackson frowned. What do you mean? He'll target whoever's giving orders, Riley replied. Jackson let out a short breath. So me, Riley didn't sugarcoat it. Yeah, Morales glanced between them. That's messed up, he muttered. Jackson thought about it for a second, then nodded. All right, he said. Then we flip it. He looked at Riley directly now. You call it. That moment hung in the air because it wasn't just about tactics anymore. It was about trust, full trust. Riley paused for just a fraction of a second, like she wasn't used to being put in that position, but it passed quickly. Spread slightly, she said. Not enough to isolate. Just enough to create angles. The squad moved, following her instructions without question this time. No hesitation, no complaints. The shift was complete. Riley tracked the terrain again, her breathing steady, her mind clearly running ahead of everyone else's. He's waiting for movement patterns, she continued. We break them, he gets uncertain. Jackson adjusted his position, doing exactly what she said. For the first time since the simulation began, he didn't feel like he was guessing. He felt like he was part of something calculated, controlled. There, Riley said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tree line. Slight right of the fallen trunk. Jackson's eyes snapped to the spot, but again he couldn't see anything. I don't, he started, but stopped himself. He didn't need to see it, not anymore. Riley exhaled slowly, lining up her shot. The world around her seemed to fade, every distraction falling away until it was just her, the rifle, and the barely visible presence she had locked onto. Time stretched thin, then crack. The third shot echoed across the valley, sharper than the last, like it carried the weight of everything that led up to it. Jackson watched the tree line, his eyes fixed, his breath held. A second passed, then movement. A figure dropped from partial cover, hitting the ground hard and staying there. That's it, Morales said quietly, almost like he didn't want to break the moment. Jackson didn't respond right away. He just stared, letting it sink in. 3 shots, 3 targets. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just precision. Riley finally lowered her rifle slightly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Not relief, not pride, just completion. The comms crackled again, Sergeant Cole's voice cutting through. Bravo squad, report. Jackson picked up the radio slowly this time, his eyes still on Riley. Area clear, he said. A pause followed. Casualties? Cole asked. Jackson glanced around briefly. Minimal, he replied. Another pause. Then who neutralized the threats? Jackson didn't hesitate this time. Carter, he said, simple. Direct silence followed again, but this time it felt different. Not disbelief, not confusion, something closer to realization. Jackson lowered the radio and looked at Riley one more time, but now there was no doubt in his expression. No question, just understanding. Everything they thought they knew about her had been wrong. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of that realization. Riley shifted slightly, her eyes already scanning beyond the cleared area, like she was expecting more, like she was always one step ahead of whatever came next. And for the first time, nobody questioned it. Nobody laughed. Because now they all knew exactly what she was capable of. The valley stayed quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that meant safety. It was the kind that made you wonder what you missed. Jackson could feel it lingering in the back of his mind, that slight tension that refused to go away even after the third target dropped. He had been in enough simulations to know when something felt off, and right now, even with Riley taking out all 3 shooters, something still didn't sit right. He looked over at her again, expecting maybe a sign of relief, maybe even the smallest reaction after what she just pulled off, but there was nothing. Her eyes were still moving, still scanning, like she didn't believe it was over either. You seeing something else? Jackson asked quietly. Riley didn't answer right away. She shifted her weight slightly, adjusting her angle to get a wider view of the terrain ahead. Too clean, she said after a moment. Jackson frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Riley's gaze stayed fixed forward. 3 snipers covering this much ground doesn't match the setup. Morales, still catching his breath, shook his head. Man, don't tell me there's more, he muttered. Riley didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either, and that silence said enough. Jackson exhaled slowly, his grip tightening slightly on his weapon. Command said this was a squad-on-squad scenario, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Riley finally glanced at him for a brief second. Command also said to expect mistakes, she replied. That line stuck with him. Not because of what it meant on the surface, but because of how she said it. Like she wasn't just thinking about the enemy making mistakes, she was thinking about the system itself. The way the simulation was built, the way people relied on assumptions. So what are you thinking? Jackson asked. Riley turned her attention back to the tree line. We were meant to find those 3, she said. They wanted us to feel like we solved it. Morales let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You're saying this is a setup inside a setup? Riley's expression didn't change. I'm saying we're being watched. That word hit differently. Watched. Not just monitored like any training exercise, but studied. Tested in a way that went deeper than just hitting targets or completing objectives. Jackson looked around, suddenly more aware of everything. The terrain, the angles, the silence that followed the gunfire. It felt less like a battlefield and more like a stage. All right, he said after a moment, his voice steady again. Then we stopped playing predictable. Riley gave a small nod like that was the exact response she expected. We move but not forward, she said. Morales blinked. Not forward, that's literally the objective. Riley adjusted her rifle, her eyes narrowing slightly. That's why they expect it. Jackson felt a slight shift in his thinking again, that same feeling from earlier when he realized she saw things differently. So we change the pattern, he said. Riley nodded once. We circle wide, make them think we're falling back. Morales raised an eyebrow. And if we're wrong, Riley didn't hesitate, then we lose position. But if we're right, we find what they're hiding. There was a brief pause. Jackson weighed it quickly, then made the call. We follow her plan, he said. No one argued, not this time. The squad started moving, slow and controlled, shifting their direction in a way that would look like a retreat to anyone watching from a distance. Every step felt deliberate now, every movement part of something bigger than just getting from one point to another. Jackson kept glancing at Riley, noticing the way she moved, low, efficient, never wasting motion. It wasn't just skill, it was experience, the kind you don't get from basic training. Where'd you learn this? He asked quietly as they moved. Riley didn't look at him. Watching, she said simply. That answer didn't feel complete, but it felt honest in its own way. They reached a slight dip in the terrain, giving them partial cover from the ridge and the tree line ahead. Riley raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Everyone froze instantly. She crouched lower, her head tilting slightly as if she was listening for something beyond normal hearing. Seconds passed, then she pointed. There, she whispered. Jackson followed her finger, focusing harder this time, forcing himself to look past the obvious. At first, he saw nothing, then something subtle. A shape that didn't quite match the natural lines of the terrain, too still, too intentional. That's not cover, he murmured. Riley shook her head slightly. No. That's observation. Morales leaned in, squinting. You're telling me someone's been sitting there the whole time? Riley's voice stayed calm. Not just someone. Someone who didn't fire. That realization hit all of them at once. Whoever was there wasn't part of the initial engagement. They weren't reacting, they were studying. Jackson felt a chill run through him despite the controlled pace of everything. So this whole thing, he started. Riley finished it for him. Wasn't about the snipers. Silence settled again, heavier this time, because now the situation had changed completely. This wasn't just a test of combat skill, it was a test of awareness. Of perception, of who could see beyond the obvious. What's the move? Morales asked, his voice lower now. Riley didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed locked on that distant position, calculating. We don't engage directly, she said finally. Jackson frowned slightly. Why not? We've got the angle. Riley shook her head. That's what they want, a direct response, something measurable. Jackson understood instantly. So we give them something they don't expect. Riley's lips pressed into a faint line, almost like approval. Exactly. Jackson looked at the squad, then back at Riley. All right, he said. Lead it. The words came naturally this time. No hesitation, no second guessing. Riley shifted slightly, mapping out the next steps in her head. We split, she said. Small distance. Stay within visual range. Morales let out a quiet breath. This is getting real interesting, he muttered. Riley continued, we create uncertainty. Make them question what they're seeing. The squad moved again, following her instructions with precision. Every step felt like part of a larger play now, something layered, something intentional. Jackson could feel it clearly. This wasn't the same mission they started with. This had turned into something else entirely. And at the center of it all was the one person they had completely underestimated. As they repositioned, Riley kept her focus locked on that hidden observer. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't forcing the situation. She was letting it unfold, guiding it instead of reacting to it. Jackson realized something in that moment that stuck with him more than anything else so far. Riley wasn't just good at this. She was comfortable in it. Like this environment, this pressure, this level of thinking, it was where she belonged. The quiet girl they laughed at wasn't quiet because she was unsure. She was quiet because she didn't need to prove anything. And now that she was finally moving, finally acting, there was no doubt left. Whatever this test really was, whatever the people watching were expecting, Riley Carter was already ahead of it. And the deeper they moved into it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about passing a simulation anymore. It was about revealing something that had been hidden in plain sight the entire time. They moved like shadows now, no wasted steps, no unnecessary noise, each person hyper-aware of their spacing, their angles. Their role in something that had quietly shifted from a standard exercise into something far more deliberate. Jackson could feel it in the way nobody questioned Riley anymore. Not because they were told to follow her, but because at this point, ignoring her would have been the dumbest move anyone could make. The confidence wasn't loud, it wasn't forced. It came from what they had already seen. 3 shots, 3 perfect hits, and now this, a hidden observer none of them would have ever noticed on their own. That alone changed everything. Riley slowed slightly, raising 2 fingers in a subtle signal. The squad adjusted instantly, spacing out just enough to create overlapping lines of sight without exposing themselves too much. The terrain dipped unevenly here, patches of dry grass mixed with broken rock and scattered debris from old structures. Perfect for concealment, perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. Riley crouched lower, her eyes still locked on that distant position. The figure hadn't moved, not even a shift. That was the most telling part. He knows we're here, Jackson whispered. Riley gave a faint nod. Yeah, she replied, but he doesn't know what we see. That difference mattered, a lot. Morales adjusted beside a low ridge, his voice barely audible. So what's he waiting for? Riley didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flicked briefly across the surrounding terrain, checking for secondary positions, fallback routes, anything that could support that observer. Confirmation, she said finally. He's waiting to confirm how we react. Jackson exhaled slowly. That lined up. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching randomly, they were evaluating, breaking down decisions, patterns, leadership. So we give him something messy, Jackson said quietly. Riley's expression didn't change, but there was a slight shift in her posture, like she was already adapting the idea. Not messy, she corrected. Unpredictable. There was a difference, and Jackson caught it immediately. Messy meant lack of control. Unpredictable meant controlled chaos, intentional disruption. He nodded once. All right, he said, glancing at the others. We changed tempo. The squad adjusted again, this time introducing slight inconsistencies in their movement. One moved a second earlier than expected. Another paused just a bit longer. Small changes, but enough to break a clean pattern. Riley remained the anchor point, her movements still precise, but now layered into the squad's shifting rhythm. It created a strange effect, like watching something organized that refused to look organized. Exactly the kind of thing that would make an observer hesitate. Seconds stretched. The distance between them and the hidden figure felt heavier now, charged with intent on both sides. Jackson kept his eyes scanning, but his focus kept returning to Riley. The way she processed everything in real time, the way she didn't rush even when the situation demanded urgency. It didn't feel like training. It felt like instinct built over time. "You've done this before," he said quietly, not really a question. Riley didn't look at him. "Not like this," she replied. It wasn't a denial, it was something in between. And for now, that was enough. Then something changed. It was subtle, easy to miss. But Riley didn't miss it. Her eyes sharpened slightly, her body going even more still than before. "He shifted," she whispered. Jackson froze. "Where?" Riley adjusted her angle by just a few degrees. "Lower, behind the rock edge." "He's trying to reduce exposure." Morales squinted hard, trying to catch it, but again, it was like chasing a ghost. "I still don't see." "You don't need to," Jackson cut in quietly. "Just trust her." The words came naturally now, without hesitation, and Morales didn't argue. Riley's mind was moving faster now, calculating the shift, the intention behind it. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching anymore. He was reacting. That meant they had already broken his expectation. That was good, but it also meant he was adapting. That made him dangerous in a different way. "He's experienced," Riley said softly. "He's not going to give us a clear shot." Jackson nodded. "So we don't wait for one?" Riley's eyes flicked to him briefly. That was the first time since all this started that she looked directly at him when he spoke. Not long. Just enough to acknowledge the thought. "Right," she said. Jackson looked at the squad again. "We pressure him," he said, "not direct fire." "Movement pressure." Morales raised an eyebrow slightly but stayed quiet. Riley shifted her position again, mapping out the angles in her head. "We close distance in layers," she added. "One moves, one covers, no straight lines." The squad adjusted immediately, the coordination smoother now than it had been at any point earlier. It wasn't forced anymore. It flowed. Each person understood their role without needing constant direction, and at the center of it all, Riley guided the pace without ever raising her voice. They started advancing. Slow, controlled. Intentional. Every few steps, someone paused, covering another's movement. Angles shifted constantly, making it harder for the observer to predict who would be exposed next. It was subtle pressure, but it built over time. Jackson could feel it, that tightening of space, that gradual closing of the gap. "If he runs," Morales whispered. Riley didn't hesitate. "He won't run yet," she said. "He hasn't learned enough." That line stuck. Learned enough. This wasn't just a defensive position for the observer, it was part of his objective, gathering information. Studying reactions. That meant he would hold position longer than most. Then, a flicker. This time, even Jackson saw it. A slight movement near the rock edge, too deliberate to be natural. "Got him," Jackson whispered. Riley was already adjusting. Her rifle came up smoothly, her breathing steady, her entire focus narrowing to that one point. But she didn't fire. Jackson noticed that immediately. "Why aren't you taking it?" he asked under his breath. Riley's voice stayed calm. "Because that's what he wants." Jackson frowned slightly. "Explain." Riley's eyes didn't leave the target area. "He exposed just enough to bait a shot. If I take it and miss, we lose position." That made sense, too much sense. Jackson exhaled slowly. "So what do we do?" Riley shifted her weight slightly, thinking one step further. "We make him commit," she said. Morales blinked. "How?" Riley didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced briefly at Jackson again, that same quick look. This time it carried something else, an unspoken question, trust. Jackson understood it instantly. "I'll move," he said. Morales looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You serious right now?" Jackson didn't look away from Riley. "He's targeting leadership, right?" Riley gave a small nod. "Yeah," Jackson took a slow breath. "Then let him think he has a shot." There was a brief pause, tension tightening across the group. Morales shook his head slightly. "Man, this is crazy," he muttered, but he didn't argue further. Riley adjusted her position again, her focus sharpening even more. "Don't rush it," she said quietly to Jackson. "Make it believable." Jackson let out a faint smirk. "Got it." He shifted slightly, preparing to move, fully aware that every step he took next would be watched, analyzed, and possibly targeted. The pressure was real now, not simulated, not distant. Immediate. Riley steadied her rifle, her breathing slowing even further, her world narrowing down to timing, angle, and intent. Everything else faded. The squad held their positions, ready but still, like the moment itself was holding its breath. Jackson moved, one step, then another, exposed, just enough. The kind of movement that looked natural but wasn't. And somewhere ahead, hidden behind rock and shadow, someone took the bait. The moment Jackson stepped out from cover, even just a few inches, the entire situation tightened like a wire being pulled too far. It wasn't a reckless move, not the kind that got people taken out in seconds. It was controlled, calculated, just enough exposure to look real. But everyone felt it. Morales stopped breathing for a second, his eyes locked on Jackson like he was already expecting the worst. The terrain ahead stayed quiet, almost too quiet, like it was waiting for something to happen. Riley didn't move, she didn't rush. Her rifle was already aligned, her body completely still, her focus narrowed down to a single point somewhere beyond what the others could clearly see. This wasn't about reacting anymore. She was already ahead of it. A second passed, then another, nothing, and then a flicker. It was small, almost invisible, just a shift of light and shadow near the rock edge where the observer had been hiding. Most people would have missed it, but Riley didn't. Her breathing slowed even more, her finger settling into position with quiet certainty. The sound came next, sharp and sudden pop. The observer took the shot exactly like she knew he would. But at the same moment, before the echo could even fully form, Riley fired. One clean, controlled motion. No panic, no adjustment. 2 shots overlapped in the air, but only one of them landed. Jackson dropped instantly, hitting the ground behind cover, his heart slamming hard as adrenaline surged through him. Morales flinched beside him, his head snapping forward. "Jackson," he snapped, but Jackson raised a hand quickly, signaling he was fine. His focus was already forward, searching, locking onto the spot Riley had just fired at. This time there was no guessing. The figure behind the rock shifted violently, losing control, collapsing out of position and disappearing completely. No follow-up movement, no second shot. Just stillness. "That's it," Morales whispered, almost like he didn't trust his own voice. Jackson pushed himself up slightly, his eyes still fixed ahead. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's it," but the way he said it carried more than just confirmation. It carried realization, because that wasn't just a good shot. That was timing on a level most people never reach. Riley hadn't just reacted to the threat, she had predicted it, waited for it, and ended it in the same moment it revealed itself. Riley didn't lower her rifle right away. She held her position, her eyes scanning the same area for a few more seconds, making sure there wasn't a second layer to it, another hidden movement waiting to follow. Only when everything stayed completely still did she relax just slightly, her shoulders easing by a fraction. Not relief, just completion. Like she had finished something she already knew the outcome of. The comms crackled sharply, breaking the silence. "Bravo Squad, report immediately," Sergeant Cole's voice came through, but it wasn't the same as before. There was something else in it now, not just authority, something tighter, more focused. Jackson grabbed the radio, still catching his breath. "All targets neutralized," he said, his voice steady but heavier than before. A pause followed. "Clarify all targets," Cole responded. Jackson glanced at Riley for just a second before answering. 3 initial snipers, 1 hidden observer, all down. He kept it simple, no extra explanation. The truth was enough. There was a longer silence on the other end this time. "Stand by," Cole finally said. The line went quiet again. Morales shook his head slowly, letting out a breath. "Man, that wasn't part of the plan," he muttered. "No way that guy was part of the original setup." Jackson didn't answer right away. His attention stayed on Riley. The way she moved, the way she didn't react to any of this like it was unusual, it kept standing out more the longer he watched. "No," Jackson said finally. He was, there was no doubt in his voice. Riley shifted slightly, slinging her rifle back just enough to rest but not fully disengage. Her eyes were already moving again, scanning beyond the immediate area like she was checking for something more. Like she wasn't fully convinced it was over. Morales noticed it too. "You still looking for something?" he asked. Riley didn't respond immediately. She let a second pass, then said quietly, "Just making sure." That was all, but it carried weight. Because after everything they'd just seen, nobody questioned it. Jackson exhaled slowly, resetting his stance. "We hold position until command confirms," he said, bringing the focus back to the team. The squad adjusted without hesitation, each person taking up a controlled position, but the energy had completely shifted now. There was no more doubt, no second guessing. Everything felt sharper. Clearer, the comms clicked again. "Bravo Squad," Cole's voice returned, more controlled this time but still carrying that underlying tension. "End simulation." "Repeat end simulation immediately." Jackson blinked slightly. That wasn't standard. Simulations didn't usually end this abruptly, not unless something specific triggered it. "Copy," he said. "Ending simulation." A distant tone echoed across the area, signaling the official end. Just like that, the pressure lifted, but only on the surface. Underneath, something else remained. Something that didn't disappear just because the exercise was over. Morales stood up first, looking around like he expected something else to happen. "That's it," he said. "We're done." Jackson stood a moment later, his eyes still drifting back to Riley. "Yeah," he replied. "We're done." Riley fully slung her rifle now, her movements smooth, controlled, like she had done this 1,000 times before. No reaction, no acknowledgement of what just happened. Like it was normal, like it was expected, and that hit harder than anything else. As they started moving back, the silence between them wasn't awkward anymore, it was different. Everyone was thinking the same thing, even if nobody said it out loud. What they had just seen didn't fit into the version of Riley they had in their heads before this mission started. Morales walked a little closer to Jackson, lowering his voice. "We really just gonna walk back like that didn't happen?" he asked. Jackson didn't answer right away, because the truth was, there was no way to pretend it didn't happen. He looked ahead at Riley again, watching her steady pace, her quiet presence that now carried a completely different meaning. The quiet girl they laughed at. She wasn't quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she didn't need to prove anything. And now that she had finally shown what she could do, there was no going back to the way things were before. By the time they reached the extraction point, the air felt heavier than it should have for a completed simulation. Normally, this was the part where people relaxed, cracked jokes, replayed moments out loud, tried to make themselves sound better than they actually performed. But none of that happened this time. The squad moved together, quiet, each step carrying the weight of what they had just witnessed. Jackson kept his pace steady, but his mind wasn't on the walk back. It was on Riley. On every move she made, every decision she took, every second where she saw something none of them could. It didn't sit like normal skill. It felt deeper than that. The transport truck came into view near the edge of the field, engine idling, dust shifting lightly around its tires. A couple of other squads were already there, some sitting, some standing, all looking like they'd just come out of their own versions of chaos. But as Bravo Squad approached, something subtle shifted. A few heads turned, not because of noise, not because of anything obvious, just a feeling, like people could tell something about this team wasn't the same as when they went in. Morales climbed up first, dropping into the back of the truck with a quiet thud. "Man," he muttered under his breath, running a hand over his face. "I'm still trying to process that." Jackson followed, taking a seat near the edge, his eyes scanning briefly before settling again. Riley climbed in last, smooth and quiet as always, taking a spot slightly apart from the others without making it obvious. Same as before, same position she always took. But this time nobody ignored it. One of the soldiers from another squad leaned over slightly, curiosity clear in his expression. "Yo, you guys finished early?" he asked. Jackson nodded once. "Yeah," the guy raised an eyebrow. "How?" he asked, like he expected some kind of story. Jackson paused for a second, then said simply, "We adapted." It wasn't the full answer, not even close. But it was enough. The truck started moving, the low rumble of the engine filling the silence that nobody seemed eager to break. Dust kicked up behind them as they rolled back toward base. A few scattered conversations started here and there, but nothing loud, nothing dominant. Most of Bravo Squad stayed quiet, not awkward quiet, thinking quiet. Morales leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough. "All right, I gotta ask," he said, glancing toward Riley. "That shot, the last one, how did you know exactly when he was gonna fire?" Riley didn't look at him right away. She let the question sit for a second, like she was deciding how much to say. Then quietly, "Pattern," she replied. Morales frowned. "Pattern?" Riley nodded slightly. "Everyone has one, even when they try not to." That was it, no long explanation, no breakdown. But the way she said it made it clear she meant it. Jackson listened, his eyes narrowing slightly as he thought about it. Pattern, timing, behavior, it all lined up with what he saw out there. "You weren't reacting," he said, more to himself than anyone else. You were waiting. Riley didn't confirm it directly, but the silence that followed felt like agreement. The truck rolled into the base, slowing as it approached the main staging area. Soldiers moved around in the distance, some unloading gear, others heading toward debrief buildings. Everything looked normal, routine, but for Bravo Squad it didn't feel routine anymore. It felt like they had stepped into something different and just walked back out without fully understanding what it was. As the truck came to a stop, a figure was already waiting near the edge of the lot. Sergeant Cole, arms crossed, posture rigid, eyes locked on them before they even stepped down. That alone was unusual. Cole didn't usually wait like that. Debriefs happened inside, structured, controlled. This, standing out here watching them arrive, felt intentional. Jackson hopped down first, boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. Morales followed, then the rest of the squad. Riley stepped down last, landing lightly, her posture unchanged, her expression as calm as it had been the entire time. Cole's gaze moved across the group quickly, assessing, calculating. Then it stopped on Riley, not for long, but long enough to notice. Inside, Cole said sharply, turning without waiting for a response. No one argued, they followed. The walk to the debrief room was short, but it felt longer. The tension wasn't loud, but it was there, sitting just under the surface. Jackson could feel it building again, not the same as in the field, but close. Anticipation, questions waiting to be asked. They stepped into the room, a clean, controlled space with a large screen on one wall and a table in the center. Standard setup. But the moment they entered, Jackson noticed something else. Two additional officers, not part of their usual training staff, standing near the screen, quiet. Observing, that wasn't normal either. Morales slowed slightly behind Jackson. Yo, this just got weird, he whispered. Jackson didn't respond, but he agreed. Cole stepped to the front, turning to face them. Sit, he ordered. The squad took their seats, the room settling into silence almost instantly. Riley sat at the end, slightly apart. Just like she had in the truck, Cole didn't start immediately. He looked at them, then at the two officers, then back at the squad. You completed the scenario in record time, he said finally. His voice was steady, controlled. But that's not what we're here to discuss. Jackson leaned forward slightly. His attention sharpening, Cole pressed a button on the console. The screen behind him lit up their footage from the field, different angles. Overhead, thermal, long-range observation feeds, every move they made recorded, shifted in his seat. Of course they got all that, he muttered quietly. The footage played, showing the initial engagement. The chaos, the confusion, the first sniper taking shots, then Riley clearer than before, focused, still. Precise, Cole paused the video right as her first shot landed. The room stayed silent, then he spoke. Explain that, he said. But he wasn't looking at the whole squad, he was looking directly at her, Riley. Didn't react immediately. She looked at the screen for a second, then back at Cole. He exposed position, she said simply. Cole's expression didn't change. Before anyone else saw it, he added. Riley gave a small nod. Yes, Cole let a second pass, then played the footage again, fast-forwarding, the second shot. Then the third, each one cleaner than the last. He paused again. Explain that, he repeated this time. Jackson spoke before Riley could. She read the pattern, he said. Cole's eyes shifted to him. Did she? He asked. Jackson held his gaze. Yeah, he said, she did. Cole studied him for a moment, then turned back to Riley. And the final target, he asked. The room felt tighter now, because that wasn't supposed to happen. Riley's eyes moved to the screen again. Watching the moment where the hidden observer took position, she didn't rush her answer. He wasn't part of the main engagement, she said. Cole tilted his head slightly. No, he agreed. He wasn't. A pause. Then, so why did you look for him? He asked. That question landed heavier than anything else, because it wasn't about the shot. It was about the instinct behind it. Riley didn't look away, because it didn't make sense, she said quietly. The room went still. Cole didn't respond immediately. Neither did the two officers in the back, but something had shifted again. Not in the squad this time, in the room, and for the first time since the simulation started, it was clear that this wasn't just about evaluating a team anymore. It was about evaluating her. The room stayed quiet for a moment longer. The kind of quiet that makes your chest feel tight, like the air itself is waiting for an answer. Riley didn't flinch. She didn't shift in her seat. She just sat there, calm, composed, like the weight of every eye in the room wasn't even on her. Jackson could feel it, though. Every glance, every pause, every subtle movement of Cole and the two officers was keyed in on her. And for the first time, he realized something he hadn't thought before. Nobody in that room was prepared for what she was capable of. Not the instructors, not the observers, not even him. Cole leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on Riley. "We've run simulations like this for years," he began, his voice measured. "We've never had a team or a single operator execute like this. Not with that level of precision, not with that level of awareness. And certainly not with the ability to predict moves before they happen." Jackson felt a shiver run through him. He knew she was good, but hearing it said out loud in a room full of seasoned observers made it feel real in a way that it hadn't before. Riley tilted her head just slightly, her eyes calm, steady. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. "I just didn't rush, I watched, I waited, I reacted when it mattered." Her voice was soft, almost understated, but it carried weight. Cole didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back, crossing his arms and studying her, like trying to decode a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "And yet," he finally said, "you neutralized every threat before any of your teammates could even comprehend the danger. That's not simple reaction. That's strategy. That's anticipation. That's instinct." Jackson watched the room shift, the tension tightening as the weight of those words sank in. Morales let out a low whistle beside him. "Yo, instinct," he muttered. "She didn't just play the game, she rewrote it." Jackson didn't argue, he had seen it firsthand. The way she had moved, the timing, the accuracy, it wasn't just skill, it was control. Complete control, like she had a thread running through the chaos and was pulling it without anyone else even realizing it. Riley's eyes didn't leave the screen in front of her, even as the footage looped over the critical moments. First sniper, second, third, and finally the hidden observer. Each shot, each movement, each small adjustment in positioning was replayed in slow detail. Jackson could almost feel himself holding his breath as the sequences repeated. He noticed the microsecond delays, the way she calculated timing, predicted actions. Every second she had in the field had been folded into instinctive precision, and it left him, and everyone watching, silent. The two officers in the back finally spoke, their voices low but deliberate. "We've observed hundreds of operators," one said, "and we've never seen anything approach this level of awareness and precision under pressure." Riley's head lifted slightly, her expression neutral. "Awareness and precision," she repeated softly. "That's all it takes." Jackson's jaw tightened. He wanted to nod, wanted to agree, but deep down he knew there was more than that. It wasn't just awareness or precision. It was her ability to anticipate. To see beyond what anyone else was capable of seeing in the moment. Cole stood slowly, the quiet authority in his movements filling the room. "Riley Carter," he said, letting the name hang like a statement rather than an introduction. "You just turned what was meant to be a training scenario into a real demonstration of operational dominance. I need you to understand the magnitude of what just happened. This changes everything." The words weren't a compliment. They were recognition, and Jackson could feel the weight of it in the air, pressing down, undeniable. Riley's response was calm, almost casual, but it carried the kind of quiet confidence that made it clear she didn't need approval. "I didn't change anything," she said. "I just reacted the way the situation demanded." Her eyes met Jackson's for a brief second, steady and unwavering. In that look he felt both reassurance and warning. She was capable of more than they all realized. Way more. Morales leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. "Man, that's insane," he muttered under his breath. "We just watched a ghost move in real life." Jackson didn't answer immediately. He just sat there, digesting it, replaying every movement, every calculation, every moment of perfect timing. And then he realized something. This wasn't just a test for Riley. It was a test for all of them. Because now the team knew something essential. The quiet girl they had laughed at, the one they had underestimated, wasn't just a sniper. She was the difference between chaos and control, between failure and survival. And anyone standing in the field after this would have to account for her, or pay the price. Riley leaned back in her chair slightly, still calm, still collected, and Jackson realized the truth. Nothing about this scenario was over. Not really. It had shifted into something bigger, something real. And the rest of them were just along for the ride. The debrief ended, but the weight of the day didn't lift. As they walked back to the barracks, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the compound. Jackson kept his eyes on Riley, walking a few steps behind her. She moved like she always did, quiet, purposeful, aware of everything, yet as if nothing mattered. But Jackson knew better. Everything mattered to her. Every sound, every movement, every pattern. She saw things no one else could, and now, after what had just happened, he realized that watching her wasn't just observation. It was learning. Morales jogged lightly to catch up, breaking the silence. "Man, you think she even sleeps?" he asked. Jackson smirked faintly. "Doubt it, not like us anyway." Morales shook his head, incredulous. "Now, I mean, she's like a ghost or something. You watch her and she's there, you blink, she's gone, and when she shoots, boom, gone." "All of them?" Jackson nodded slowly, running a hand through his hair. He remembered the hidden observer, how Riley had seen him before anyone else even knew he existed. That kind of anticipation wasn't luck. It wasn't training alone. It was instinct honed to perfection. They reached the barracks and stepped inside. The place smelled of metal, gear, and sweat, the familiar scent of military life, but it didn't feel familiar anymore. Everything they had known about missions, strategy, even teamwork had shifted. Riley moved straight to her locker, slinging her rifle over the side and methodically checking her gear, never speaking, never looking around. Jackson leaned against a wall, letting the quiet settle around him, trying to process. Morales plopped onto a nearby bench. "I still can't wrap my head around that last shot," he muttered, shaking his head. "I mean, she took the bait like it was nothing, and then bam. Target down before you could blink." Jackson exhaled slowly. "Yeah, that's Riley. She doesn't just react, she predicts. She controls the chaos instead of letting it control her." Morales gave a low whistle. "Man, I thought I was decent at reading the field, but she's operating on a whole different level." Jackson didn't argue. He didn't have to. He had seen it himself in every calculated step, every measured breath, every micro-adjustment Riley had made in the field. She was something else entirely. The room stayed quiet for a few moments before Jackson spoke again. "You know what this means, right?" Morales glanced at him, brow furrowed. That we're lucky she's on our side," Jackson gave a faint smirk. "Yeah, that, but also we just saw the future. And if we don't pay attention, we're not gonna keep up." Morales frowned, unsure if Jackson was serious or joking. Jackson was. He had watched her manipulate the battlefield with nothing but patience and precision. This was beyond skill. This was dominance. Riley finally looked up. A slight crease in her brow, not at them, but at a distant point in the room, as if she was already seeing the next scenario, the next move, the next layer of the game. Jackson realized she was always thinking ahead, always planning, always calculating. She wasn't just part of the team, she was the anchor, the one everyone else would have to adjust around if they wanted to survive. A knock came at the door. Cole's voice followed. "Carter, squad." "Report immediate." Jackson and Morales exchanged glances. The call wasn't unusual, but after everything that had happened, they both felt the tension spike. Riley didn't even flinch. She moved immediately, collected, methodical, grabbing her gear as if nothing had changed, though everything had. They followed Cole down the hall to a briefing room. This time, the walls were lined with monitors, maps, and tactical data. Officers moved around quietly, observing, analyzing. Jackson could feel the weight of anticipation in the air. Riley didn't speak, didn't react outwardly. She just stood at the edge, scanning, calculating, seeing things the rest of them didn't even know to look for. Cole spoke first. "You all performed admirably today," he said, his voice steady, but there was something in the undertone, respect, awe, maybe even a hint of wariness. "But one of you changed the game. One of you demonstrated a level of field awareness and precision I've rarely witnessed." His gaze locked on Riley. The room went still. Every eye followed him. Every mind waited. Riley's expression didn't change. She remained quiet, composed, and Jackson realized that her silence carried more weight than any explanation could. Cole continued, "Carter, what you did out there, reading patterns, anticipating moves, neutralizing threats before anyone else could, was exceptional. You didn't just execute a scenario. You dominated it." Jackson felt a chill run through him. He knew it was true. He had seen it. But hearing it said aloud in front of others made it undeniable. The quiet girl, the one everyone had underestimated, had just reshaped the way they all viewed what was possible. Morales muttered under his breath again. Man, she's on a whole different level. Jackson didn't answer. He simply watched her, understanding now that Riley wasn't just another operator. She was something else entirely. And anyone in the field who faced her, intentionally or not, would have to reckon with that. Riley shifted slightly, eyes scanning the tactical displays, already processing what might come next. Jackson realized that this wasn't over. Not for her, not for them. She was always ahead, and anyone who followed would have to keep up or get left behind. The debrief ended, but the impact didn't fade. Every step they took afterward, every glance, every decision carried the weight of what they had witnessed. Riley Carter had changed everything, and the team and the missions ahead would never be the same again. The next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, the base was already alive with movement. Soldiers jogged past, boots hitting the concrete in steady rhythm, radios crackling faintly with chatter and orders. The air smelled of diesel, sweat, and anticipation, the familiar scent of early morning operations. But for Bravo Squad, nothing felt familiar anymore, not after yesterday. Not after Riley Carter had changed the game entirely. Jackson walked beside her, keeping pace quietly, trying to process the fact that everything they thought they knew about the field, about strategy, and about skill had just been rewritten. Morales trailed slightly behind, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yo, man," he muttered under his breath, "I'm still trying to wrap my brain around yesterday." That was insane. Jackson didn't answer. He was watching Riley instead. She moved deliberately, almost meditatively, her eyes scanning the base, the terrain, even the movement of other soldiers. It was subtle, but he could feel the focus radiating from her. Nothing escaped her notice. Nothing. And now, after the debrief and the accolades from Cole, that awareness carried even more weight. Inside the operations center, monitors displayed maps, satellite feeds, and tactical overlays. Officers moved with quiet urgency, coordinating missions, analyzing intel, and logging data from exercises. Jackson followed Riley through the room, noticing how she never stopped observing. Her eyes flicked over everything, the placement of personnel, the angles of entry points, the subtle gaps in security. Even in a controlled, safe environment, she was calculating, anticipating. Predicting, Cole appeared again, this time with a tablet in hand, his expression tighter than usual. "Bravo Squad," he said, voice low but commanding, "you've been reassigned. Effective immediately, your next mission will test more than just marksmanship. It will test awareness, judgment, and adaptability. And Carter," his gaze locked on Riley, "we expect you to lead." Jackson felt the room tilt slightly under that weight. Lead, not just participate, lead. And Riley, as always, gave no outward reaction. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned her focus back to the displays. No hesitation, no anxiety, just calculation. Jackson exhaled slowly, realizing that following her was the only option if they wanted to survive whatever this next phase was. Morales leaned in, whispering just loud enough for Jackson to hear. "Man, leading. She doesn't even need to speak to control the field. We're basically along for the ride." Jackson didn't argue. He knew the truth. Riley's leadership wasn't loud or forceful. It was invisible. She commanded not through words, but through timing, precision, and instinct. They had all felt it yesterday, and now they were about to see it amplified on a much larger scale. As the squad prepared for deployment, Riley checked her gear meticulously, every piece placed exactly where it needed to be. Jackson noticed she didn't speak to anyone. Not because she was unfriendly, but because she didn't need to. Her presence alone set the rhythm for the team. Each movement, each decision, followed the tempo she silently established. The hidden observer, the snipers, the entire scenario from yesterday, those weren't lessons. They were proof. Proof that her mind operated on a level the rest of them could barely comprehend. The transport chopper landed, rotor wash kicking up dirt and debris across the tarmac. Jackson climbed aboard, scanning the landscape as the others followed. Morales hesitated briefly, glancing at Riley. "You really think we're ready for this?" he asked quietly. Riley didn't answer, she never did. She just climbed in, securing her position with calm efficiency, her eyes already moving to the next angle, the next threat, the next opportunity. Jackson realized that's how she always answered. Not with words, with action. As the chopper lifted, carrying them over dense terrain, valleys, and ridges, Jackson watched the world blur beneath them. And for the first time, he understood fully what made Riley Carter different. It wasn't just skill. It wasn't just timing. It wasn't just instinct. It was vision, the ability to see the battlefield not as a collection of targets and objectives, but as a living, breathing puzzle where every move mattered, every hesitation was costly, and every decision could be predicted if you weren't careful. The squad landed quietly at a remote forward base, the kind of location that made you feel the weight of isolation immediately. Riley stepped out first, surveying the environment. Jackson followed, then Morales. The terrain was unforgiving, rocky ridges, sparse vegetation, and long sightlines that favored whoever controlled the high ground. Riley walked ahead, her eyes scanning constantly, her mind already working through patterns, possibilities, and contingencies. "Formation," she said finally, her voice calm but precise. The squad snapped into position without hesitation. Not because they were forced to, but because every move Riley made had become instinct for them. Every shift, every angle, every adjustment had been dictated by her awareness long before they even realized it. Jackson realized something then. The missions ahead weren't going to be about brute force or luck. They were going to be about anticipation, about reading the field, reading the enemy, and reading each other. And with Riley leading, they had one advantage no one else would ever see coming: a mind that didn't just react, it controlled the battlefield itself. Morales exhaled sharply, almost like a warning to himself. "Man, she's on a different plane," he muttered. Jackson didn't answer. He just followed Riley into the rough terrain, feeling the silent certainty radiating from her. And he knew, deep down, that surviving the next operation would depend entirely on staying in sync with her, not just her skill, but her vision. Every step forward was deliberate. Every sound registered, every shadow held meaning, and Riley Carter, quiet as ever, was guiding them all through it, one perfect move at a time. The mission had reached its climax before anyone fully realized it. The terrain was harsh, jagged ridges cutting through valleys like scars, the wind whipping against their faces, carrying dust and debris that stung the eyes. Jackson followed Riley closely, his focus divided between the environment and the invisible rhythm she dictated. Every step, every movement, every pause was orchestrated without words. The squad moved like extensions of her mind, seamlessly, instinctively, anticipating threats even before they appeared. The hidden observer, the snipers, the unpredictable dangers, they all became secondary to her awareness. She didn't just navigate the battlefield, she controlled it. As they approached the final objective, the tension was nearly tangible. Every shadow, every flicker of movement across the ridges, every sound carried potential danger. Morales kept glancing nervously, muttering under his breath about how impossible it all felt. Jackson said nothing. He had long since stopped questioning her. Riley's calm focus was magnetic. It pulled the squad into a perfect synchronization, and even the officers observing from command felt the shift in the field's energy. Suddenly, a distant shot echoed across the valley. The squad froze mid-step, instincts kicking in before thought. Riley immediately signaled, shifting her weight and lowering herself behind cover with a fluid motion that seemed impossibly fast. Jackson followed, covering her flank, and Morales crouched just enough to stay safe. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching as they evaluated the angle, the distance, and the origin of the shot. Riley didn't speak, she didn't need to. Her eyes scanned, recalculated, and predicted. 3 o'clock ridge line, she finally said, her voice calm but precise. The squad adjusted seamlessly, moving in perfect coordination. Jackson felt a surge of awe. This was no longer just skill, it was domination. Riley anticipated the enemy's next move, predicted it, and countered it before anyone else could even react. A series of carefully calculated shots followed, each more precise than the last, neutralizing threats with almost surgical efficiency. When the dust settled, the field was silent. Not the tense silence of the unknown, but the quiet of completion. Every target had been neutralized, every angle secured. The squad exhaled, some leaning heavily on their rifles, others simply standing still, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. Jackson turned to look at Riley. She was calm, composed, almost unbothered, as if this was routine. But he knew better. The field had been hers from the moment they stepped in, and the outcome, flawless execution, was proof. Back at the base, as the team debriefed, officers from multiple branches were visibly impressed. Maps, satellite feeds, and live footage were replayed, analyzed, and studied. Cole addressed the room. "What you just witnessed isn't typical," he said. "It's rare, and it's the result of one operator's ability to anticipate, adapt, and dominate the battlefield." His gaze locked on Riley. "Carter, your performance today redefines operational excellence." Riley didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, letting her quiet confidence speak for itself. Jackson watched her, realizing that her strength wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding. It was quiet, relentless, and absolute. Every member of the squad had felt it. Every observer had recognized it. And anyone who underestimated her in the future would learn the hard way. Later, outside the debrief room, Jackson and Morales walked together, the weight of the day still heavy on them. Morales finally broke the silence. "Man, we just saw something unreal today." Jackson nodded, his mind still replaying every move, every calculation, every perfect moment of control. "Unreal doesn't even cover it," he said. "She didn't just complete the mission, she owned it." Jackson glanced back toward Riley, already walking ahead, scanning the horizon, already anticipating what was next. It was clear now, nothing about her was ordinary. Her quiet demeanor, the way she moved, the way she calculated, it all created an operator who wasn't just part of a team. She was the force around which the team moved, the pivot point of every decision, every engagement, every victory. The sun dipped behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the compound. Jackson understood a fundamental truth. The battlefield wasn't just about firepower, strategy, or numbers anymore. It was about vision, anticipation, and the mind that could see everything before it happened. And that mind belonged to Riley Carter. Morales shook his head again, almost in disbelief. "I'm telling you, we're never gonna look at missions the same way again." Jackson didn't reply immediately. He simply nodded, watching Riley disappear into the distance, calm, composed, and unstoppable. And in that moment, he realized something deeper than admiration or fear. He realized survival, success, and victory would forever be tied to her decisions, and that following her wasn't optional. Riley Carter, the quiet girl who had once been underestimated, had become the standard everyone else would be measured against. The battlefield had changed, and so had the rules. And as the wind swept across the ridges, Jackson knew one thing for certain. Anyone who thought they could predict her, outsmart her, or underestimate her would be proven wrong. Every time. The mission was over, the squad had survived, but a new reality had begun, and Riley Carter stood at its center, silent, precise, and unstoppable.